One of the things that's always fascinated me about older pieces of media is that whole thing of what was it like at the time and what was it like to watch on broadcast, which is why I set myself the challenge of watching every episode of the Sylvester McCoy era of Doctor Who in order. It's an era of the show where I have seen every single story before, but I wanted to put myself in the shoes of someone watching and absorbing all of it at the time, albeit I binged it over a span of roughly 2 months versus the 3 or so years it was actually originally broadcasted over. I learned a lot through doing this, not only about the show, but also about myself as a fan and what draws me into the show and what makes me do random challenges like this. And I got a great sense of how it must have felt as a fan back then, seeing the show go through such a large overhaul and radical change. I've not made a formal script for this video like I usually do, I just made bullet point notes at the end of each story and at the end of each episode, which we're going to go through now. I also rated all these stories out of 10 just to add a bit more fun, and just because YouTube loves it when you give rankings and overall scores to things like this. But anyway, let's get started. My name's Ruby, aka Hoobie Jones. That's Petrol the Dalek, and I hope you all enjoyed diving headfirst into the era of Sylvester McCoy. Starting off with Time and the Rani. Now, before making this, I'd only seen Time and the Rani once before, I think when I was 15 years old and I got the tape in a job lot, and to be honest, I didn't really remember anything about it. So I put it in, press play, and from the very first scene, it just felt off and super awkward and nothing like the Doctor Who which I remembered it being. The pacing was all over the shop. The direction was so uncomfortable. There's a scene where the Rani gets attached to the whole brain thing in the episode, and the way that they put her into the capsule and close her in and attach her brain just looks so fake and so awkward and so off that it's really hard to actually get in there and enjoy the episodes. Sylvester McCoy also just doesn't feel like the Doctor for much of this story. He just feels like a random guy that stood in front of the camera and sort of waving his arms around up until episode 3, where he sort of falls into the role of the Doctor. The score and the music throughout this entire era I found to be so obnoxious when watching all the stories in order. Yes, it was the late 80s, yes, it was the era of the Yamaha DX7 and all those crazy synthesizers, but it's so in your face and so over the top that when you watch it now it can actually be quite jarring. There's also lots of the companion Mel screaming, which really starts to grate after a while. We do find the Doctor though towards the end of the story, and there's all these funny bits where he gets famous phrases wrong, and it feels like, okay, we're kind of on the right track now. We're kind of heading towards something more interesting and more familiar to what we know as Doctor Who. The VFX in the story were really good. They were probably one of the highlights, as was Kato O'Mara's overall performance of the Rani, and I get the impression, like I do with a lot of the dud stories of Doctor Who, that all the actors and the directors and everyone working on it, they were just doing the best with what they had at the time. And unfortunately, when you read into the production of how this serial came about, it was supposed to be written for Colin Baker and the regeneration was supposed to happen towards the end, etc. So it does have that sort of cobbled together mishmash unfinished feel. Overall, I give Time and the Rani 5 Pip and Jane Bakers out of 10. Moving on to Paradise Towers. Paradise Towers is one of those cult stories that everyone seems to love, and I've never vibed with it. I've seen it twice before this run through and I just didn't enjoy it whatsoever. I had to duck out of this story after part 1 on this rewatch because I just got so burnt out with this era of Doctor Who and felt like I couldn't cope with it anymore. I feel like the bit where Mel's almost drowned by the pool monster is genuinely one of the worst moments in classic Doctor Who. You cannot honestly look at these two stories and go, this is great sci-fi, this have continued. In the eyes of people like Michael Grade, I could totally see why they wanted to cancel it, because when this era of Doctor Who was bad, it was really bad. Also, it's funny to see the actor Clive Merrison in this story years before he would play Mark Corrigan's dad in Peep Show and shout "No turkey." It's nice to see him actually deliver some other lines throughout the piece. I think the best thing about this story for me is that from the very first moment of the first episode, Sylvester McCoy has just become the Doctor. I don't know what happened between the making of these two stories, but by this point, he's just totally comfortable in the role and he's totally found himself as Doctor Who. I really like the thing with the Doctor with the rule book where he ends up creating a bunch more rules and that's how he escapes from the two guards. He just has some great dialogue and some great overall scenes. I think conceptually Paradise Towers is a very, very interesting story, and it has a great supporting cast. And do you know what I thought when I was watching it this time? I was thinking, this could just be a Russell T era Doctor Who story. The basic premise of it, I can imagine Russell doing something very similar and doing something quite cool and quite different with it. But this story was just not for me. I give Paradise Towers 5 ice hots out of 10. When I initially set about to do this rewatch, I was really dreading getting to Delta and the Bannermen, as I remembered not enjoying that one at all. And when it came down to it, I actually had loads of fun. This was the 3rd time I've seen it, and it's the first time where I really feel like I understood it, laughed out loud, and got into it. The cliffhanger at the end of part 1 with the green head emerging from the egg is actually a really good piece of Doctor Who. It's just a shame that the resolution afterwards is just so rubbish. The romance between Billy and Ray is also a lot of fun throughout this serial, and I think that's the main thing that we've sort of forgot with the past two, is that sense of fun. Yes, the story's not very good, it's all over the shop, but everyone's enjoying themselves who's making it, and that really comes off to me as the viewer. As a 1950s period piece though, it bothers me because the instruments in the music scene weren't even available to commercially buy at that point, and that's always really bothered me. I really like those 2 American side characters, and they add a lot to this overall very dumb and very stupid story. And after Time and the Rani and Paradise Towers, it felt like a genuine breath of fresh air. I can't believe that I'm saying this to you right now, that I really didn't enjoy Time and the Rani and Paradise Towers, but I had a great time with Delta and the Bannermen. The conclusion was absolutely ridiculous. We don't get enough time with any of the characters to really get invested in them or really get to know them, as this is a 3-parter. But overall, I had a great time with this stupid but meh story. I give this story 6 jars of honey out of 10. Next up, we've got Series 24's close-up with Dragonfire. I remember really loving Dragonfire when I first saw it at the age of 14, and within the first few minutes of starting it, I was absolutely in my element. It just felt like so much fun and has such a great backstory behind it. I love that Sabalom Glitz is back. He's my favourite character from Trial of a Time Lord, and that whole thing of Glitz selling his crew to Kane is just a great little thing, and when they come back later and he tries to sort of befriend them all again after he sold them to be frozen, it's just so Glitz, and I wish he would have come back more in the classic series. I feel like Kane is a really great villain, and as we sort of peel back the layers and get to know his backstory a little bit more, I think he's a really fascinating character. I actually got a bit chilly in bed watching this story, looking at all the ice, because I think I was taking it a bit too seriously, and I was just getting a bit too into it. The cliffhanger at the end of part 1 is even worse than I remember. It's that famous one where the Doctor seemingly climbs down this cliff for no reason. Apparently in the script it made much more sense, but yeah, when you're watching it, it just doesn't make sense that he's walking along this path, and he could have just carried on this path, but he decides to climb over this ledge and just start hanging down from his umbrella, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. This is the introduction story for the fan favourite character Ace, and I really like those sort of brief moments we've got with Ace and Mel where Ace sort of starts sharing her backstory a little bit. I feel like between this and Delta and the Bannermen, Mel has grown into a really great character, and her goodbye at the end was so much more heartfelt and emotional, me just having spent an entire series with her. I really had a great time with Dragonfire, and it just felt like a really solid night's entertainment that breezed by and didn't outstay its welcome at 3 parts long. Dragonfire from me gets 7 Sabalom Glitzes out of 10. Season 24 was, to be honest, a bit of a slog to get through for this video, but it served as a rather poignant and great reminder that no matter how dark and bad it seems, Doctor Who can and will always get better. Next up, we've got Remembrance of the Daleks, and you can tell straight away that the production team were trying to do something totally different with this one. It has a cold open, and it already feels dramatically different from everything we've just seen before. Even though I've seen this more times than I can remember, I always forget that this is Ace's first time on a proper adventure with the Doctor. Remembrance of the Daleks is probably the closest the classic series ever got to becoming New Who. You can also imagine this story being helmed by Nine and Rose, especially with the darker Doctor's plot throughout the piece. The supporting cast once again is absolutely great, with some really interesting and believable backstories, and for me, Remembrance of the Daleks is nostalgia done just right. I was glued to the screen for the entire adventure. There's not as much to say about this one as maybe some of the others because it's just perfect. I've talked about it to death. death in my other videos, and I loved it even more watching it in order, seeing this absolute leap in quality in every single way between this and Dragonfire and what had just gone before. There's absolutely no criticisms or complaints from me with this story. This is everything that classic Doctor Who should be. I give Remembrance of the Daleks 10 unlimited rice puddings out of 10. Moving on to the Happiness Patrol. I had such a grin on my face for all of episode 1. It's funny that I don't vibe with Paradise Towers at all, but I absolutely love the Happiness Patrol to bits. I genuinely laughed out loud this time when the Candyman appeared. Again, watching it in order seemed to make it funnier and more enjoyable. I always forget that the Happiness Patrol is just 3 parts long, and I'm often surprised and saddened when it suddenly ends and the pace suddenly picks up at the end of part 3. The Happiness Patrol for me is political satire done so well that it could really represent any oppressive regime and conflict, and although it's garishly 80s, the fact that it's a regime against depression and sadness and covering up the cracks in society makes it sort of timeless. Whilst I was watching, I imagined one certain world leader we have now being both Helena and the Candyman at the same time, delighting in the execution of innocent people, then just going on the news and bragging about it and smiling about it all the time. Sylvester is just absolutely fantastic in this, as is Sophie Aldred, and this dynamic between the old and mysterious professor and the rebellious young teenager really grows each and every time they're on screen together. I must say that I didn't enjoy it as much as I normally do just because I'd finished Remembrance of the Daleks the day before, and although the Happiness Patrol is a great story I'd recommend to any classic Doctor Who fan, in sequence it just can't live up to the might of Remembrance of the Daleks. All in all, it's a great story with some great sets and great acting, and I had a lot of fun with this one, delving into the deeper dark side above what's quite a silly and sort of childish premise. I give the Happiness Patrol 9 fondant surprises out of 10. Nothing says 25 years of Doctor Who like the utter disappointment that is the next story, Silver Nemesis. It just feels like a lesser retread of Remembrance of the Daleks, and honestly, it was such a mixed bag. I remember being really indifferent to it the first time I saw it, but especially after the Happiness Patrol, it seemed like such a huge downgrade from what we'd seen before. The Cybermen just seem really weak and frankly useless throughout the story, although I did keep laughing at that bit where the jazz was being used to broadcast to save the day and it confused the Cybermen. That really made me smile. I just found the humour of Silver Nemesis so awkward and odd most of the time, and it just seemed like such a missed opportunity as the Cybermen get so easily destroyed and vanquished. This is a trend that happened throughout classic Doctor Who, that every time the Cybermen came back, they just seemed a little bit less scary than the adventure before, and they just seemed a bit weaker, and it's almost like the Cybermen become parodies of themselves, just standing around saying excellent, and they just become more like these robots that easily fall over, rather than these humans which have converted themselves into the Cybermen in order to save their dying race. I really just didn't have a good time with Silver Nemesis. The one scene that I really did love though was the threat of the Doctor's past being revealed to him, as Sylvester acts this so well, and he seems genuinely terrified that all of his dark secrets may actually be revealed. Overall, it seemed like we were back in the slogs of season 24 with Silver Nemesis, with hardly any good Cybermen action, and well, hardly any good action at all. I give Silver Nemesis 6 silver arrows out of 10. Up next is perhaps the story I was most excited to revisit in The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. I'd totally forgotten about the little throwback scene at the beginning where Ace wears Tom Baker's scarf in the TARDIS. That was a really fun moment, and the old school fans must have really loved it at the time. I can remember being totally indifferent to this story the first time I saw it. The cliffhanger to part 1 was just so anticlimactic and in totally the wrong place as well, that I actually visibly groaned and was just like, is that it? Was that the best that you could do? As this story got going though, I felt I really started to enjoy it, although it felt like a bit of a slow burn for the first couple of parts. I find the idea that it's a meta-commentary on Doctor Who itself really interesting, that there are these people that are trapped in the psychic circus, being forced to give everything they've got over and over again, whilst a bored audience just sit there and saying it's not as good as it was before, and I find that idea really fun and really fascinating. That thing with the greatest show in the galaxy nearly being cancelled as well because of asbestos in the studios and them having to film it in a circus tent in the car park makes me really thankful that we have anything at all, and it makes it even more of a miracle that it's as good as it is when you watch it. The Ringmaster's rap always really makes me smile and really makes me laugh, and I just feel like it's so 80s and just so unbelievably charming. One thing I realised during Greatest Show in the Galaxy, especially doing this rewatch, was how quickly the limitations of this era begin to show. It just feels like all the stories are so small and there's hardly actually any real people in them because the casts are so small. I also feel like the plot points are very, very predictable by this point, and we're just stumbling around trying to fill time until the next cliffhanger so the story can advance to its next step. And I can see why some fans at the time got tired of the show and didn't really want to watch it or weren't interested in it anymore. The Greatest Show in the Galaxy is one of these stories which now has this legendary reputation, and whilst I can get it and understand why, on this run through I liked it, but I didn't love it, you know? Overall, Greatest Show in the Galaxy gets 7 rapping ringmasters out of 10. So that wraps up season 25 of the classic era of Doctor Who, and honestly, I was feeling kind of burnt out on this era after the Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Yes, season 25 was a massive step up from season 24, but I just wasn't feeling it, and it came to the end of the day and I found myself not wanting to watch these episodes, which was a really, really strange feeling. So I waited a few days and put it off, and then I finally sat down to watch the opener of the final season of classic Doctor Who with Battlefield. I remember Battlefield being just a bit mid and just a bit dull at best, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that it was written by Daddy Ben Aronovich, and just found myself really loving the overall vibe and atmosphere this time round. I loved seeing the Brigadier back, I loved seeing Doris on screen, and I loved the concept of the Doctor actually being Merlin, and that whole mystery around that he was bound in an ice tomb for all of eternity, and yet none of this may have happened to him yet. It's just a fascinating idea that reminded me very much of something Stephen Moffat would write in New Who. There's a great supporting cast in this one. Jean Marsh is incredible as Morgaine, and the story is so camp, so fun, and so joyful. I really feel like the cliffhangers are a step up in this story. The actual devil coming out at the end of part 3 was something I was not expecting, and him being blue was actually quite fun and quite enjoyable. I love the Doctor's speech to Morgaine at the end of part 4 about the nukes just being endless death and no way to really fight, and the ending with all the girls going out together to ditch the brig and the guys and the Doctor really made me smile. It's really weird because I remember not liking this at all, and on this run through I was glued to the screen. At the end of every episode I was like, shall I go to bed? Shall I put on the next Battlefield? And I just kept watching, and I had a really, really great time. I give Battlefield 8 Dorises out of 10. Next up we have Ghostlight, and immediately I got those Tom Baker, Philip Hinchcliffe, Robert Holmes era sort of vibes, and it was a really nice change of pace after the high octane atmosphere of Battlefield. I love Doctor Who stories that aren't really historicals per se, but set during a particular time period and play on the fears of that time. Like in this one we've got Darwinism and the idea that evolution is totally evil and sent by the devil and all that, and I really enjoy the idea that aliens and monsters somehow had a role to play in all of this. Writer Mark Platt is a name I'm sure many of you are familiar with, as he has a list of very interesting credits to his name, including the excellent Big Finish audio Spare Parts, and he really to me has a flair for crafting stories that pose the question of what is human, and that whole dehumanization thing with a great body horror element to his stories, which is always interesting to either listen to or to watch in this case. I like how contained it is, once again contrasting with the past few stories we've had, that it just takes place in this one central location. I was once again getting New Who vibes throughout, and I could imagine David Tennant and Martha tackling this story or something like that. I loved how Ace doesn't scream during the cliffhangers to this story, and it feels like we've got some excellent progression in that point, because It's just so predictable when the female companions just scream at the end of the episode. It just becomes boring and it just really ages Doctor Who. The final part of Ghostlight had so much information crammed in there, and I feel like this story is slightly hampered by the overall reduced episode count. Give it another part, let the ending breathe for a bit and let us explore it a bit more. Then it would be an absolutely perfect piece of Doctor Who. Overall, I had a lot of fun with Ghostlight, a breezy story with great performances, and I give Ghostlight 8 Nimrods out of 10. Next up we have the absolute classic that is The Curse of Fenric. This is god tier Doctor Who for me, and I've seen it so many times that every twist and turn is just ingrained in my memory. I'm probably not going to say much about this one because I just think it's perfect in every single way. I love the whole question of morality with the vicar losing his faith and not believing in good anymore because of all the German children being killed by British bombs during the war. It feels really well paced. With a lot of classic Doctor Who, the action doesn't actually kick in till maybe part 4, but right from the start of this one we've got action in every single episode, which makes it really exciting to watch. I'd forgotten we have some nice experimental camera work in this story. Even a first-person point of view shot of Ace climbing down a ladder, which feels very exciting and very modern. Throughout watching it, once again, it just feels like the next evolution of Doctor Who. And if we got another season like The Curse of Fenric, then I believe it could have been the best season in the show's history. The climax is just so powerful, where the Doctor has to shatter Ace's belief and faith in him. And you see that by the end of the adventure, Ace still doesn't fully trust or believe in the Doctor. And it's amazing how much character development Ace has in a relatively short span of time. I give The Curse of Fenric 10 Viking curses out of 10. Now we've got the last ever serial of classic Doctor Who's history in survival. It's funny because I put episode 1 on in the living room just as my parents were going to bed one evening, but they were both really intrigued by it and ended up watching most of part 1 with me because they were intrigued by the plot of this weird mystery with the cats and the Earth setting in the modern day, and it was really interesting to see their perspective on it. On this rewatch, the sequencing of these episodes seemed perhaps a little bit strange. I thought that it would have been more logical and impactful, say if after Ghostlight they go back to Perivale in the modern day for survival, and then the classic series ends with The Curse of Fenric. Imagine how much of an epic ending that would have been as the final story of the original run. The cliffhangers to survival are just awesome. The reveal of the Master at the end of the first part, and then Ace turning into a cheetah person in the second, I just absolutely love it. I think survival perhaps gets unfairly judged because it's the last ever classic Doctor Who story, and by all accounts the production team and everyone making it didn't know when they were filming it that this would be the case, and I feel like if they had have known it would have been the last ever Doctor Who story for so many years, they would have taken it in a different direction and gone with a completely different story. The Master's plot in this one is rather nonsensical, but I just love Anthony Ainley to bits, and any excuse to see him on screen is alright by me. I got really emotional at the end and actually started crying when they went back to the TARDIS and Ace calls it home and they wander off into the sunset. I felt this great sense of sadness and depression that it was ending, that there was no more Sylvester McCoy episodes to watch, and there's just so much weight to that ending. I feel like they just needed one more season to tie everything together and to fulfill the now legendary Andrew Cartmel master plan, but more on that in another video. Overall, I think season 26 was the strongest of Sylvester's entire run, and there's just this great progression between the series that, as I've said multiple times, if it carried on and we got one more, it would be the best in all of classic Doctor Who. So what did I learn from watching all this era in one go? Well, as I said, the limitations become very quickly apparent when you watch the stories in order. But even though when they've got very little interesting stuff to work with, Sylvester McCoy, Sophie Aldred and Bonnie Langford absolutely gave it their all in every single scene that they were in. It gave me a new appreciation for not only Sylvester as the Doctor, but also for Ace, Mel, Glitz and all the other great side characters. Some stories had a lot more impact watching them this way, like watching Ghostlight in sequence gave me a new appreciation for the story. But on the other hand, after something like Remembrance of the Daleks, the Happiness Patrol just doesn't seem quite as interesting or incredible. Likewise, following The Curse of Fenric with Survival, there's quite a leap in the style of the storytelling and the overall format of those episodes, and one suffers because the other one before it was just so much greater and just so much more enjoyable. I'm one of those people that think although it was a great tragedy that Doctor Who was cancelled, perhaps it needed to happen in order to become the powerhouse of New Who in the mid-2000s, and that maybe we're reaching a similar point with Doctor Who as we are now at the time of filming this video. Would I recommend doing something like this for someone interested in Doctor Who? Yes and no. It's easy to get burnt out on the show watching it like this, but at the same time it will give you a special and unique bond and relationship with whatever era of the show you choose to do this with. Have you ever done anything like this before? Let me know in the comments below. Or similarly, if you want me to do any other Doctor Who related challenge similar to this with watching a particular Doctor, watching a particular monster or era, or anything similar, I'd love to hear it. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, then the channel also has a Patreon, and any support on that platform would be greatly appreciated. The link is in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Who Be Jones YouTube channel.